Go ahead and get started with the webinar. If you want to start the recording. Good day, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on your location. And welcome to Oxford Computer Group's and Crossmatch webinar. All multi-factor authentication, or what we know as MFA, is not created equal. What we're going to be talking about today, our goal is to share this industry knowledge and best practices around multi-factor authentication. Some topics that we're going to cover. We'll look at some use cases in different industry. Take a look at some of these trends we're seeing in authentication, some really interesting new capabilities coming up in that sense. And then take a look at how we find the right mix for your organization. What type of multi-factor is going to provide the best functionality for you based on those industry needs and particular interests of your organization, and perhaps even some limitations. Some quick housekeeping here. We're going to last about 50-60 minutes. We have the ability to take questions from you, of course, as you see in your console. We'll take questions as we go along, and we'll address those questions in a Q&A at the end. We will be recording the webinar, and we'll send you a link to the recording. If for some reason you have to leave early, you'll be able to do that. I'm Mark Riley, an architect with Oxford Computer Group. You see my Twitter account there as well. Doing most of the heavy lifting today will be Jeff Carpenter, Director of Authentication Solutions for Crossmatch. And you see Jeff's Twitter handle there as well, my InfoSec Life. And so I'll give Jeff the go-ahead here in just a second. I want to give you a quick overview of who we are at Oxford Computer Group. We are an identity management, governance, and security organization. We also have a number of people that do device management as part of that. We have quite the track record of deploying solution for identity both on-prem and in hybrid solutions. Been doing this for quite a while. Over 700 projects delivered around the world. As you see, we've multiple time been Identity Partner of the Year winner for Microsoft and finalists. And we are based here in Seattle and have really good connections with the product group, and it helps us bring solutions to people. So you see here the services we offer. Planning and assessments, our visioning workshops are a big piece of how we help users and customers find the proper solutions. We do deployment as well, and we can follow on with managed services to help keep those systems running properly. So full service identity integration shop with governance and security as all part of that, as we see that, as Microsoft says, identity is the new control plane, and we're driving that for our customers. Now I'd like to turn the session over to Jeff and let Jeff get started on the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Mark, and welcome everybody to today's session. Very happy to be here and talk with you about my favorite topic, which is identities and authentication. And you may be wondering why we call this session All Multi-Factor Authentication is Not Equal. And I'll get to the reasoning behind that kind of enigmatic phrase here in just a moment, because I think it's an interesting, thought-provoking topic. I want to talk about who Crossmatch is. First of all, we are not a dating site. So if you came to this webinar hoping to find your significant other, maybe had a disappointing Valentine's Day, that's not what you're going to find. Instead, you're going to be matched up with really great identity and composite authentication solutions. We say composite, that means the full breadth of the authentication spectrum. The maximum amount of authentication methods mapped to your best business driving use cases, deployed on all of the relevant technology, whether it's cloud, traditional, and legacy applications, web, or mobile. And you can see there, Crossmatch does really three different things. I always like to say everybody's touched our product in one way or another. It's true because our roots are in biometric identity. So if you've ever transited a border or you've ever had anything to do with law enforcement, and Mark, hopefully nobody's been in prison, but if you have, rest assured that your identity has, has been verified by one of our readers there. But we do a lot more. We're big in the retail space. We call it commercial enterprise. And in the restaurant industry, for example. But today we're going to focus on that third bucket there, which is really all about what's going on in authentication. Now, if you've joined us, maybe you're looking to find out what's new. Maybe you're looking to get some answers on best practices, what other organizations in your industry are doing and how they're dealing with situations, and hoping to get some of that knowledge that Oxford and Crossmatch, being that we talk to such a broad spectrum of customers, can share out. And you're looking to maybe, fit this with your, what's going on in your Microsoft environment today. Well, if you've attended for any of those reasons, you're in the right place, and we're very happy that you're here today. As Mark mentioned, we are going to be taking questions today. Please type those questions you may see off in your panel to the right in the questions area there, because we'll be happy to answer those. Let's talk about navigating a complex landscape here. Now look at that, coming right at you is a nice CGI landscape there. And the only reason we put it up there is it kind of reinforces our theme that not all MFA is equal. And I said I would tell you a little bit about what that means, why we chose that as a title. Well, as we talk to customers out there, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of uncertainty about different technologies. For example, where AI, biometrics, contextual authentication, behavioral, where are these things playing in the authentication landscape, and where should I, as a technology leader in my organization, be advising my boss, the CISO, be advising our IT board on where these technologies are going so we can be best prepared to take advantage of them in the future. So I thought I'd start with a metaphor of this landscape, navigating the landscape. Well, actually, before I do that, to finish my thought on not all MFA is equal, this is your traditional classic people, process, and technology challenge. Meaning people, you're trying to support new users and new use cases in your organization. Maybe you're trying to cover, like in the case of GDPR, if you've joined us from Europe or you're doing business in Europe, you may be aware that the middle of this year, your cybersecurity program may be covering your third parties or your vendors. That's one of the new requirements in the law. So people challenge, new processes. We've already talked about new regulations, GDPR, PSD2. We're going to talk today about something called DFARS. If you're a defense contractor, you may know all about that. And the idea is that any one of those things may or may not, identify your exact business challenge or need. But in a general sense, you may be able to see how these technologies and what Crossmatch and Oxford bring to the table can help you with your particular challenge. So I mentioned people, processes, and of course an influx of new technology, and we'll go through that stuff today. But the metaphor still holds, regulatory rock, compliance canyon. You may be driving through that rocky road there. And there, you know what, Mark, there is no good U word I found out to describe geographical or topographical features. So I just called it user upland, meaning that there are new users and new challenges with supporting those users. For example, if you have an end user that you can't really enforce a security policy on, such as, their device must be of a certain, software build for the OS, you had to work around that. You got to support those new users somehow. And of course, technology topics along the way, we'll be covering lots of that stuff. Now, multi-factor authentication, we never want to lose sight that it's not about technology. It's not about what individual authentication method you're putting into a user's hand or on their mobile device, or in the case of biometrics, what they're swiping or what's being scanned. It's about solving your business challenges, and it's about use cases that you have. So that's what we're interested in today. And with that, we have a fun and interesting poll question. We're just going to go ahead and open up here. We want to get to know you. Who are you? What industry do you represent? And of course, your choice is finance, healthcare, government. And for those joining us from Canada, that would be your local, your provincial, and your national government. Educational, this could be higher education. It could be K through 12 or other. And of course, it says organizers and panelists don't vote. So please go ahead and chime in, because this will help Mark and I tailor our discussion today. And we fully expect the majority of people will be in the other category, but it'll help us at least figure out, who we're talking to here. So we're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to share the results so you can see. Looks like we got a mix of folks today. Education, welcome. Good to have you there. Nobody from government, so we may spend a little less time on that today. In fact, we'll spend a lot less time. Healthcare and finance. And then, of course, as expected, because we do have a diverse audience here, over half are in the other category. So, okay, let's go and continue on here. Thank you, by the way, for filling out the poll question. Let's talk about some of those industries. So 14% of you joining are in the financial services industry. And what's going on there? Well, there's a range of compliance needs. The standard, compliance and regulatory needs are still out there. They still need to be followed. There's a few new ones. The New York State financial regulations. Crossmatch has been doing quite a bit of work in that territory, helping banks, commercial and retail banks, and Wall Street trading firms, and any financial firm of certain size that has a branch in New York State may fall under this. And we're helping these organizations get in compliance, which means that if they touch a system that has customer data on it, they have to have multi-factor authentication. And the new things that are happening also in financial services there are a number of customer-driven security requirements. So end users are now becoming a real thing, and they always have been, in banks. But with, for example, PSD2 in Europe, now the requirement not only at time of authentication, but to confirm a transaction is now also a requirement that we're seeing pop up in banks. So the ability to offer API authentication support directly through that mobile application is important. And then, of course, banks are banks, financial institutions are what they are. They're driven by, in a lot of cases, really big mainframes that still have some very important software and data on them. And there is a need to integrate into all of those. So what OCG and Crossmatch can deliver there is that we support all modalities, meaning that whether it's traditional authentication methods, so for example, you may need hardware tokens for your privileged administrators, mobile for your end users and your internal employees, road warriors, and even biometric. We're seeing that more and more, especially as I mentioned, the New York financial regulations, where you have these users authenticating to their trading desks, for example. Having that ability to simply finger swipe and get access to your trading application can be the difference between executing a trade or not. So we see that a lot. And would also invite you to a customer case study that we just did recently, GISA Credit Union. And their big driver there was, again, meeting the, on audit requirement, the National Credit Union audit, in which, crazily enough, I don't know if crazily is a word, but the National Credit Union audit requirements require that users have unique passwords for every application. And I'm not aware of any other regulatory regulation out there that has that requirement. And so how do you do that if you have a bank, employee that has to authenticate into 6 or 7 or 8, 10, 12 different applications and has to remember each one of those passwords? Well, our solution, DigitalPersona, helps out with that, and we're able to, with our password manager, safely and securely store those. make those passwords longer and stronger, sustain an SSO session, and deliver those passwords to all those applications in a unique password to meet that audit requirement. So financial services is one area, and I invite you, if there are questions for these things, again, put them in the question area there, and we'll make sure we answer those as we go along, and definitely at the end of today's session. Now, defense contractors. So we don't have too many people in government. In fact, our poll said nobody is in government that's joined today, but you might be in, there we go. Just get on the right slide here, but you might be aware of this, and I won't spend too much time, but DFARS is a requirement for U.S. Federal contractors. So if you have a contract from the Department of Defense, they will likely put into your contract in one of the addendums a DFARS requirement to have your information, not confidential information, but really the next level down, which is the stuff that the bad guys could use to get to your confidential information. It's called CDI. That CDI is, I don't remember what the acronym stands for, Common Defense Intelligence, something like that. But it basically means that things that hitherto were not considered sensitive are now considered sensitive and must be put under multi-factor authentication. What's more, there's a requirement for Windows logon authentication, and that's something that Crossmatch and Oxford do particularly well. With our tight integration with the Microsoft infrastructure, we're able to deliver a wide range of authentication methods, not just smart card or password or finger swipe to get into your Windows logon, but pretty much anything you can think of. Your mobile, at a variety of OTPs, one-time passwords, delivered in a bunch of different ways. And we found this many defense contractors found this very attractive. And so we've been doing some work there. And law enforcement as well. So law enforcement, there's the CJIS requirement. So if you're out in a squad car, you're a patrol officer, and you want to get access to any federal database that includes information about the bad guys, you will need to make sure you do so in a multi-factor way, and do that through the squad car terminal. So we've been helping organizations meet that requirement, as well as when they go back to the precinct, city hall, court, and need to access data and information through their Windows logon. The same thing is with DFARS. We're able to help organizations have that robust choice of authentication methods right through their Windows logon. And next up, healthcare. And I know Mark is an expert on healthcare with Oxford, and he's going to want to chime in here. But healthcare is still really very much about continuing to meet the HIPAA compliance needs, changing and ever expanding as they are, continuing to make things easier in complex healthcare environments. In other words, hospitals have workflows that are sometimes nightmarish. By the numbers, almost 10% of you on this call are in the healthcare industry. And flexible authentication methods are also needed. We always hear the term doctors don't want to pull out a smart card, a token, their mobile device. There are many challenges in healthcare environments with using mobile devices. And the big issue here is making sure that healthcare professionals can get the information they need, that the organization and patient information stays secure, and quality patient care is delivered. So one of the things that's unique about what Crossmatch delivers here is in our DigitalPersona product, we have something called kiosk mode. Kiosk mode is something that very few vendors offer, but it is the ability for that healthcare professional and that organization to completely meet that HIPAA requirement of having that automated log off after a period of time, and yet having the healthcare professional being able to very quickly log back in again without having to go through additional authentication. So we're really happy with that. We see a lot of organizations deploying that because of our kiosk mode feature, and also being able to report out and meet those HIPAA compliance and audits. Mark, is there anything you wanted to say on this?
Yeah, actually, this whole area of looking at the different industries and different needs. Healthcare is one of the more restrictive ones, and we see this all the time when we're putting in identity solutions, that there are restrictions about what equipment can be used in what places, and we see that in other industries as well. In manufacturing, we can have issues with having the proper devices that we want. So having flexibility to use different devices and be able to distribute this biometric information, particularly to these kiosk type applications, which are growing in use in lots of industries, I think is really useful and really quite a good point, and one of the reasons that we're working with you guys. So I think it's good to bring all this up.
Absolutely. And you mentioned all industries. We are seeing it. The next biggest one is manufacturing. Time was you didn't have to secure or have users that, were on the factory floor, on the warehouse floor, do multi-factor authentication. But now those users are accessing, supply chain type of applications. And in a lot of cases, just doing so with a PIN or a very static, weak password. So we're able to come in there and say, hey, listen, let's take a look at your workflow, and we don't want to introduce complexity or inconvenience users, make them less productive, but with a simple finger swipe, simple contactless card access, however you want to do it, even facial scan in the future, we're able to get those users back on the system in a shorter period of time than they would if they actually had to type in their password. So good stuff going on there with kiosk mode. And next up here, we're going to talk about key trends in multi-factor authentication. And Mark, this is my favorite section, so hopefully I don't run too long because I like chatting about this stuff. Where is authentication headed? We get asked that a lot by organizations that are ready to pull the trigger on an authentication solution that they want to last for years into the future. It's an investment in not just in the technology, but in the people and in the competitive advantage that they face. We already talked about in financial services, using authentication as a competitive advantage. Traders at a desk that are able to get access back to their terminals at sub-second speed, you're able to reduce fraud. You're able to make sure that no one else is impersonating them, the insider threat, and they're able to make sure that they can get access to the information they need when they need it. So it really is a competitive advantage. But I put together this slide here to show you where authentication is headed. Start off to the right. The old paradigm, which has already been pretty much flushed down, memory lane, but just in case anybody's kind of holding on, with both hands onto that paradigm, or maybe has an old school IT manager or IT group, static rules-based type of authentication where one size fits all. The classic example is everyone who wants to get onto the VPN has to be issued a token. Static, that's gone, right? Also, starting with the authentication method as the first and the primary driver is also gone. So there was a time when you could say, well, we want to make sure all of our users can authenticate using OTP delivered via SMS, something like that. If that's your mindset, we would encourage you to think a little broader, and think in terms of, what business challenge are you trying to solve now and in the future. Also, proprietary authentication methods out. So the days of, I use static, or the hardware token, for example. Hardware token still valuable, but now it's more, FIDO universal two-factor authentication token. That's where organizations should be looking. And also, think about it, your employees and how they work. They work on different devices throughout the day and in different locations. And one authentication method is likely not going to support, even an individual user. So you really have to have a robust set of authentication methods available there. So you can see the new paradigm. New paradigm is all about analytics. I won't use the word AI. I want to stay away from that. We are just going to talk about risk-based authentication today. If you want to think it's AI, that's fine. I'm not going to label it that. But the new approach really starts with where's the risk in the organization? Is user convenience and making sure users are productive, is that part of the paradigm? Most of the time it is. In fact, we find in a lot of cases it's the leading driver. And compliance is also continues to be, and always has been really, a driver in authentication. In other words, you look in your organization, look at your MBOs, or look at the people in your organization around you and how they're goaled, and chances are it's all about passing an audit, making sure you don't get any corrective action reports, and making sure things are really buttoned up tight in the organization from an audit and compliance perspective, whether that's an external requirement, a state and local or federal, or whether it's an internal requirement that you have. All right, so that's what's going on with the new paradigm. And so I'm going to give you 6 different things that I think are going on in trends in authentication that you can take back to your team today and say, hey, are we ready for this, and how are we aligned to take advantage of some of these things that were presented on the Oxford Crossmatch webcast. And the first is that authentication is turning into a risk analytics game. The idea is, everyone knows static passwords. I won't even waste any oxygen on this. Static passwords can be hacked so many different ways, phished and used and guessed, and password database is stolen and hashed and cracked. So that's passé. But what the bad guys we know are focusing on now is how you break two-factor, and it's a much more difficult challenge. But we've seen things like hacking the telecom SS7 protocol, being able to intercept those types of, especially in SMS, OTP messages sent. And so the bad guys are very keenly focused on that. There's some human elements, tricking users into giving up their OTP, within it, and being able to use it in a certain time frame. So the way to get around that is really to look at risk analytics. It just can't be one factor. You can't rely on a password. It can't be just 2 factors, a password and something else. You really got to go into just layers of things, device and location and things we know about the user. And that requires any solution you have to have a risk engine. And that risk engine is not rules-based. It's based on heuristics. It's based on Bayesian logic and data science that is really able to calculate all these inputs and give you, return to you as the IT decision maker a probability that that user is who they say they are. So think about where we've been. We've been in an area where you needed to be 100% sure. Now we're moving to something where because of the bad guys and because of the advanced hacking, cyber attacks that are going on, you may have to deal with something less than 100% in order to deliver and drive the business needs, business results that you need through your organization. So it needs to start there. You need to look at vendors that have a robust risk analytics approach to their authentication platform, and not just provide the next gee whiz latest authentication method. The next thing up is contextual authentication. So we established that once you have the authentication, you need the risk engine, now you need stuff to feed it with. Well, what do you feed it with? Well, the first is what we call contextual authentication. And that's all these things. What do we know about the user? Now, thanks to network protocols and devices, we now can figure out certain things about a user. Now, before you cry, privacy challenges, we fully acknowledge there are absolute privacy issues with this, and everyone acknowledges that. Especially in Europe, very privacy centric there. But this really is, started at base level, where you just have a client doing a handshake with a host. You have a user connecting through their device to a network. There are a number of protocols that are shared. If it's a web-based session, for example, you have things like browser resolution, you have browser plugins, you have screen resolution and default languages, and lots of things that are shared across during a web session in order for that web frame to be set up. those are things that can tell us, does that look like the user's typical web session? Things that are red flags, of course, users change their default language. Users rarely change their browser default language. But if a user suddenly changes it from English and, they change it to Portuguese or Swahili or Chinese, that may be an indication that it might not be that user. That is a feed into that risk engine. Same as device. We can look at a user's device. You can put a flash shared object through a web browser or a cookie. And those are the things that can be replayed securely to a risk engine to say, you know what, we've seen this device before. It's very likely that user. Now, we always say you never rely on a single authentication method. Again, you wouldn't rely just on a device or just on the user's location or any of these other things to determine if it's that user. These are all feeds that get put into the risk engine and determined, a probability that it's that user. And then, based on that probability, then that's where you apply your business policies. And that's the power of the risk engine. Because once you can apply those business policies, then you can apply the authentication options and choices, so that it's no longer about want to get on the VPN, must use token. Want to get access to your desktop, must use password. It's about giving users choice based on the risk. So if the probability, I give an example of, let's say, a user who we know from their mobile device, and again, this is a bit futuristic, but this is where we're going. This will be here before you know it. A user has on their device an app, that is it's their authentication app, and they have near field communication. So as they move to their computer, they don't need to do Control-Alt-Delete and a password. Their computer unlocks. But it's not just the near field. It's the fact that we know it's that user's device. The device is bound to them. We know the user's location. The user did a strong authentication in the morning and still has that SSO or single sign-on session going. And so you've just made it easier for the user and potentially introduced a stronger authentication for the organization, a stronger security posture. Because ultimately, and here's the kind of thing that stands everything up on its head, ultimately, you want to get to a point where you're challenging users, in other words, providing them or requiring them to do a visible authentication. You want to do it less. And that seems weird and perverse, but that's the ultimate goal of all this technology is, if you have assurance that it's the user, they're in command of their device, the location works out, everything on their web browser looks good, and these aren't just single feeds. There are multiple feeds from, the web session and device and location that go in there, maybe 50, 60 different things. Then you can apply a visible authentication only when necessary, only when it's risky or it looks like that user, is entering into a more sensitive application or accessing sensitive data. That brings us to trend number 4. What's going on with biometrics? Crossmatch, as I mentioned, is a leader in biometric identity solutions. We're in a lot of different places. I guarantee you've touched our product before if you've ever traveled internationally or if you've applied for TSA pre, you worked in retail, there's a lot of different touch points for that. But where are biometrics in authentication? And here again, we can go back all the way to the iPhone 5S, with iTouch, which, by the way, the individual who has a patent on the iTouch sensor there actually works for Crossmatch. So that's the kind of technology we bring to the table here. But biometrics has great promise because, as I mentioned, the iPhone 5S socialized it with users. Biometrics was something scary, something to be wary about, and then it became, oh, hey, it's on my new iPhone. Lay a finger on it and get access to your stuff. Banks now use it very ubiquitously, and enterprises are also starting to use it. But the role of biometrics, is is an interesting one. It provides a number of different advantages to an organization. Proof of presence is the big one, meaning that if you're doing, requiring a supplemental authentication or step-up authentication to a user, as we call it. Let's say the user, they're in a single sign-on session and they're bouncing between applications, but now they want to access something that's a little more sensitive. They want to go out to their SAP or Salesforce. And now we say, okay, let's introduce a supplemental step-up authentication. Having that user pull out that device, lay their finger on the finger sensor, not only provides the authentication event or verification that it's that user, but it provides that the user at that moment is in command of their device. Proof of presence. So if you're feeding device and biometric, log authentication event into your risk engine, that's typically a very strong authentication event. We already talked about convenience. Users are preferring biometrics more and more. Face is the next frontier, and financial services are really leading the way with face recognition, pioneering or deploying out proof of concepts so that users, you don't even have to do a selfie, you don't even have to really press anything, just bring your phone up, scans your face, and it can actually get you on board faster, get you access to your application, unlock your device faster, whatever you're trying to get to. And if you believe Apple, it is 10 times more secure than a fingerprint. So I don't know if you believe that, but that's what their research they provided to Congress indicated. So biometrics, I won't dwell too much on it because we do have other things to move on to, but should be part of your journey. There are, of course, just like with risk engine technologies, there's questions on with biometrics, should you centralize your biometric database, template database, or should you decentralize, have them on individual devices? And that is a question that I think, Mark, would be interesting if somebody wanted to type in, that as a question. Ask us at the end of today's session. But let's move on to trend number 5, behavioral biometrics. These are really coming of age. Crossmatch just announced back in December behavioral biometrics in our DigitalPersona 2.3 release. What behavioral biometrics do is exactly what you think. They're nearly invisible to the user, both from a use and an enrollment perspective, and they can be another feed into your risk engine. So again, not looking at this as a primary authentication method, but as a potential step-up authentication method. And the behavioral biometric that we chose is called Keystroke biometrics. And as you're typing in the password field, your password, so in as few as 7 strokes, we can actually determine whether it's you or whether it's somebody impersonating you or whether it's a bot that has stolen your password. So that's pretty cool stuff. And if you're in financial services, you may be already familiar with this because a lot of financial organizations have already been using keystroke biometrics for a long time. But this really provides a new frontier in authentication, because the last trend that we'll talk about here before we move on to our final section is something we call continuous authentication. Biometric or behavioral authentication and continuous authentication go hand in hand, because continuous authentication has been talked about for a long time, and full disclosure, nobody's really doing it right now, but it's coming. And I say this as the final trend we're going to talk about today, because you should be looking at aligning your organization around what are we doing not only for continuous or contextual authentication, and do we have a robust risk engine? What are we doing for biometrics? And you should be looking at what you're doing for behavioral, because the nirvana state we'd like to get to is one where users do something, and it can be today, like what we have in our product, type in something, but it can also be the way they move their mouse. You may not realize it, but when you go to your mouse and you wake up your PC when it's sleeping, you move your mouse in a very distinctive biometric way that a computer can detect, whether it's you, and even somebody who's looking at your mouse movements and tries to impersonate you will not do those set of movements the way you do. Could even be, some organizations, some vendors are even doing the way you hold your mobile device. The way one person holds it up to their ear is different from the way another person holds it up. But what it does is, behavioral authentication allows us to then have the capability to collect different things about a user to prevent, an in-session hijack, man in the browser, man in the middle type of an attack where somebody just takes over your session there. And so put it out there as food for thought, because I think it's very interesting what's going to be coming down the pike. And I think that gets us to another poll question here.
Jeff, before we go on there, you did have a slide for a summary here, but Richard
Yes.
had a question. Wouldn't you still want at least a PIN on an NFC auth? Seems losing your phone that automatically, unlike computer or app, could be a security risk. And I think the reason I bring that up here is I just think it speaks directly back to what you're talking about, where you use more than one input to determine authentication. So something like an NFC might be very useful for presence detection, but doesn't provide enough context to be an authentication source all on its own. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yes.
And also just to be aware of our time is slipping.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Richard. Thanks for your question. I would say, if I were setting up that policy, I would have the user at this point do something once they got back to their PC. You're right. The calculus here is that users rarely lose their mobile devices and they rarely lend them out to people. So it's going to be something that's on them. But until we get to such a time when it is, more certain, yeah, you can have it unlock with a PIN. But other cool, you know what, I won't even mention it, but there are other cool uses of NFC we'll have to tease out for another time, right, Mark, on another webcast. Okay, we're going to do a quick poll question here. I'm going to ask, let's share out with the group, because I think that, biometrics are on people's mind these days. And I want to see if you're using biometrics. If you're not a big deal, but if you are, let us know what you're using. Face, fingerprint, iris, or other. You can interpret this question however you want. If you want to consider that your users are unlocking your app using their fingerprint on their Samsung and iPhone devices, that's a biometric.
I would have expected more face, frankly, on with the iPhone 10.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so new, All right, we're going to close this thing up, and yeah, you know what? It's a third of you on fingerprint, and the rest are not quite there yet, which of course is fine. But
most
definitely
probably using your readers.
Yeah, that's right. Crossmatch URU 4400s. Okay, now we're going to close it out, and I'll just remind everyone again, questions are typed in or highly anticipated here. Finding the right mix, and mix means people, processes, and technologies is always very important. And Crossmatch and Oxford have partnered to deliver our DigitalPersona solution. It has a number of advantages that I just wanted to talk about over other authentication products that are out there. And the first and foremost is the reason why Oxford and Crossmatch are together is because of our Microsoft relationship. Oxford has been Microsoft Partner of the Year so many years it's hard to even count them. I think 7 times, and nominated many more. But when we say we have a tight integration with Microsoft, we actually deploy right on the Microsoft domain server. So that means you don't have a separate server to stand up and install the OS and harden and patch and everything. You're just doing it right on the domain server. And that serves another purpose in that you're looking for high availability disaster recovery. DigitalPersona as an authentication solution, critical to protecting your infrastructure and your applications, replicates right along with your Microsoft Active Directory. So anywhere where you have high availability on AD and you're using the Microsoft replication capabilities there, you will have DigitalPersona as well. And so when we pitch that to organizations, they absolutely love it because it shortens the time your IT staff needs to be able to train up on the solution. In terms of deploying out policies, again, we do it right through Microsoft GPO, group policies. So you want to change a policy, set up an authentication policy, you just push it right out through GPOs. And then the other reason why organizations, have chosen Oxford and Crossmatch is because we work together very carefully to really involve ourselves in customers' challenges, their business challenges, their workflows, their need to accommodate various types of really, quite frankly, gnarly, applications that other vendors, quote out, hundreds of thousands of dollars in PS to. We're able to come in there and work with you and create those integrations that work for you. And we gave a few examples today in healthcare and defense and finance, just to give you a flavor of, the types of problems that we solve and the way we go about doing it. And the final thing I'll point to you on this slide is our broad range of authentication methods. So Crossmatch, we decided a long time ago, we weren't just going to be about biometric authentication. It was going to be a broad story we were going to tell that was, was open standards. So it's based on FIDO, that it's, open protocols, SAML, and OAuth. And it was going to be one that was really around supporting the broadest range of applications, supporting the broadest range of authentication methods, and doing so in that risk-based approach we talked about, where you can apply one authentication method, you can step up to another, to get the assurance level that you need that that user is who that user is. The authentication methods we have are, made for supporting the broadest set of use cases, meaning that internal employees, yeah, it's great. They can be deployed out with, tokens, hardware, software, smart cards, mobile application supports that. But you also have to think about your third parties, your vendors, your suppliers, your auditors, your, third-party billing companies and encoding and supply chain organizations that you partner with, and how they can interface with your applications and on your network. And we can very eloquently support those users and fold them right into the use case as well. And there's a lot of questions out there on Windows 10, Windows Hello, and Windows 10 for Business specifically. And why don't I just use that going forward? And as I mentioned, Oxford and Crossmatch, we love Microsoft. We work great in Microsoft environments. We are certainly not here to dissuade anyone from, going to Windows 10. But you want to think about it as you roll out your, your critical projects, your infrastructure, your next generation access management, because all of the things that we talked about today about risk-based and contextual and biometrics and behavioral, Crossmatch is really already thinking about those things, developing those. We've released behavioral in our 2.3 release. And there are some challenges with doing everything in a Windows 10 environment that we just want to make you aware of. And one of those things, I think probably the thing that says it best is this chart right here. I'll go ahead and build out a few of these things. When you're looking at Windows 10, of course, not everyone in your organization may be there right now. A lot of folks still on Windows 7, not so much Windows 8. And Windows 10 will be at critical mass in about 18 months, but it's not there right now. Also, as you take a look at the browser, what's supported from Crossmatch versus what's supported in Windows Hello, only the Edge browser is supported there. And then, as we talked about all session long, it's not about an authentication method, any one authentication method, but it's about supporting the broadest set of use cases. And it's about having that risk engine that will ask that user to authenticate only when necessary. And Crossmatch has that, and we're continuing to add additional ones. And with Windows Hello, what you get today is PIN, device, and biometrics. So you just want to be aware of that. Machine learning with Crossmatch, and not so much with Windows Hello. But the big one here, Mark, that we hear over and over is that, you know, credential roaming and central storage. So remember, I alluded to a little bit with biometrics, there's the debate of whether you centralize your biometric database, template database, or whether you leave it on the individual devices, like on the iPhone, for the user to unlock, or their Windows Hello PC in this case.
And I think these are, I think this is a big differentiator, and really something Microsoft has indicated that they're not going to do with Windows Hello. They're not going to distribute that biometric hash, or the hash that you're using to authenticate these pieces. So I think it's an important piece to speak to. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. And that absolutely critical point that you made there is that we talked about how users will roam, meaning they'll go from device to device throughout the day. So in that scenario, if you're using Windows 10 for everything on your Surface, on your PCs, multiple PCs, you're going to have an enrollment on each one of those devices. And with us, you enroll one place, central management of that template with some technology. We don't have enough time to talk about it today, but patent pending technology called biometric tokenization that Crossmatch has to basically obfuscate and make a mathematical representation of that user's fingerprint, such that if the biometric database were stolen, it wouldn't be able to be used for anything. You can't back that up and create a gel finger. And also, if you steal two databases and you compare them, you're not going to be able to tell if a user is a member of one or the other or both. So very cool stuff there, and something to think about as you're looking at Windows 10 and thinking if that might be something to meet your next generation authentication needs.
And just before you leave the slide, I think there's one more you could have highlighted here, which is the attended enrollment.
Yep.
Again, a somewhat unusual piece with your solution, the ability to have security officers do that attended enrollment so that we have real good proofing of the person who's submitting this biometric that we're going to use as a fairly high level authentication piece at this point. So another good feature to call out, and I'm taking more of your time.
Not at all, no problem at all. Identity proofing, very important, always the first step in any type of enrollment situation. And having an attendant there is ever so important. Okay, let's wrap it up real quick. Protecting Office 365. Crossmatch does that with our SSO for 365. Again, we're able to provide right through the Windows interface an you see the application there to the left. Any type of authentication method that we support and that your policy enables. So you don't have to support all those or present all those to a user. You can support just the ones that that user is enrolled with, and the user will have a choice. So let's say they forgot their phone, or they're just not feeling particularly like they want to do an OTP today. They can do a fingerprint swipe on a supported device or through their PC. So that's an example of how we protect Office 365. And the last slide before we go to the question section here is leaving it with finding the right mix. You all joined us today to learn about why all multi-factor is not equal, because people, processes, and technologies are changing. And as you're looking to and thinking about how you're going to do your IAM, identity and access management strategy in the future, think about the elements we've talked about today and who best in this industry and which vendor is best positioned to be able to comprehensively deliver on those. And we would like to be, Crossmatch and Oxford, in the game, in your consideration there, because we have all of the traditional authentication factors that you may want to support your needs today, as well as combining the things that you need in the future, the behavioral and the biometric capability and location and contextual and all of that for the future. With that, Mark, I think we might be ready for some Q&A. Oh, you know what? We got one more poll question because we want to keep things going until the very end there. And you know, this one, we hope most people answer yes on this, but we just want to gauge your interest. You know, based on everything you've heard today, are you interested in a digital persona demo? Right. People still tabulating the votes there. We'll close this thing in about 5 seconds there. So 5, 4, 3, 2, we're closed out. And based on this, looks like we hit some interest buttons there. Very nice. So over half of you said you would yes be interested in demo or might be interested. So with that, let's open it up for some questions. What do you have on the chat line here, Mark?
Well, I did have another question. Stephanie asked, should an employee leave an organization? How do you prevent an employee from going rogue? How quickly can you remove access for that user?
Yeah, the answer is very quickly and also anywhere and everywhere where that user has access. So one of the challenges organizations have is, you know, you have one identity or access management system for your traditional applications, and then you deploy another for your SSO and web applications and cloud. And in that situation, you can have users, and you know the news stories are full of them. User who does the corporate Twitter account, leaves the organization, they disable that user in AD, and it disables them on those traditional applications, but they forget to do it for their cloud applications. And that user who's on their BYOD device going out through the internet, nothing's going across the network, still has their access credentials. But with Crossmatch, where we deploy in traditional cloud, web, mobile, across this up and down the stack, when you disable a user in our solution, and we do rely on AD, you are disabling that user's ability to get access to any and all applications that enforce or run through our solution.
Okay. Randy, I'm still unmuted, sorry. Randy asked, do you have a partnership with Ping?
Do we have a partnership with Ping? So we do not have a direct relationship with Ping, but they use the same protocols we do. So SAML 2.0, OAuth, FIDO, so I think we have many customers that use Ping, that use Okta, use SailPoint, and we are able to integrate right into those solutions.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, actually, we partner with Lieberman Red, now yes. Baumgart, Lieberman, a Baumgart company, Red, and their solution integrates well with Crossmatch right. as well.
For PIM-PAM,
directly with that. So number of applications that work with that, and that's a great application for a step-up authentication.
Yep.
Let's see, and one more here. David was asking, is there integration with MS Azure MFA and Crossmatch?
Absolutely, yes. So we integrate with Azure, and there's two different ways we can deploy Azure. We can do an on-premise and an Azure. Actually, let me back up. You can do an Azure only or an Azure on-premise deployment, and we'd be happy to get you information on that. But yes, we do that.
All right. Well, that's wow. You did an awesome job on time, Jeff.
We went right up to time, didn't we? Yeah.
So much. A lot of great information. I encourage everyone to take a look at this and see. There's some very interesting components here, bringing together the risk-based, as we're doing with a lot of things, to not just rely on one entry to give us access, but a more holistic view of the user and their needs. So once again, thanks, Jeff. We appreciate it. I guess we'll stop the recording here and end the webcast.